At 35,000 feet over the North Atlantic, a powerful CEO watches his mother collapse in her first-class seat, her skin pale and her breathing ragged. The flight crew calls for a doctor. No one responds until a young black woman from economy class stands up calm and focused. Ignored at first, she steps forward with a simple but urgent request: keep her still, let me help. Over the next 45 minutes, her knowledge and courage not only save a stranger's life, but completely transform her own. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. 35,000 feet above the North Atlantic, the cabin lights had dimmed and most passengers had drifted into a quiet haze of sleep or silence. The hum of the engines was steady, almost peaceful. Outside the windows, nothing but darkness stretched in every direction, an endless ocean of black below and stars scattered like salt above. But something wasn't right. In seat 4A, Margaret Hale shifted uncomfortably. Her hand pressed hard against her abdomen, then moved up toward her chest. Her breathing had grown shallow, fast, uneven. Cold sweat beaded on her forehead, glistening in the dim cabin light. She tried to speak but only managed a whisper. "Richard, something's wrong." Her son Richard Hale turned instantly, alarm flashing across his face. He'd been reviewing quarterly reports on his laptop, numbers and projections that suddenly meant nothing at all. The color drained from his face as he saw his mother's expression. "Mom, what is it?" he asked, rising so quickly that his water glass tipped onto the tray table, spilling across his papers. Margaret's skin had gone pale, almost gray. Her lips were losing color by the second. She clutched her stomach and let out a low moan that seemed to come from somewhere deep and terrible, a sound Richard had never heard his mother make in all his 52 years. "Pain," she gasped, each word a struggle, "like something tearing from my stomach, up to my chest." Her body curled forward, then arched back against the seat. Sweat was pouring down her face now, soaking the collar of her silk blouse. Her eyes were wide, terrified, searching for something to hold on to. Across the aisle, a flight attendant named Sandra rushed over, her face composed but tight with concern. She took one look at Margaret and her training kicked in immediately. This wasn't turbulent sickness, this wasn't anxiety, this was something far more serious. "Is there a doctor on board?" Sandra called out, urgency rising in her voice. Another attendant emerged from the galley with a bright orange medical kit, her heels clicking rapidly against the cabin floor. "We need medical assistance immediately," she repeated down the aisle, her voice carrying through the quiet cabin. "If there is a licensed physician on this flight, please identify yourself now." The announcement echoed through first class, then business, then economy. Heads turned. People stirred from their sleep, pulling out earbuds, lifting sleep masks. Murmurs rippled through the rows. But no one stood up. Silence. Long, dangerous silence. Richard looked around desperately, his eyes scanning every face he could see. Surely someone, surely on a transatlantic flight with over 200 passengers, there had to be someone who could help. His mother was gasping now, her body rigid with pain. Her fingers had gone white from gripping the armrests. A thin line of saliva escaped from the corner of her mouth as she struggled to breathe. "Someone help her," Richard said, his voice cracking with fear he hadn't felt since he was a child. "Please, anyone." But the aisle remained empty. The silence stretched on. Sandra was already on the interphone, speaking rapidly to the cockpit. The other attendant was opening the medical kit, but her hands were shaking. Neither of them was equipped for this. Richard knelt beside his mother, taking her hand in his. It was cold, so cold. "Mom, hold on. Help is coming. Just hold on." But even as he said the words, he knew they might not be true. They were 6 hours from any airport, 6 hours from any hospital, 6 hours from anyone who might actually know what to do. And his mother was dying in front of him. All the money in the world, all the connections, all the privilege that came with first-class seats and corner offices, and being Richard Hale, CEO of Hale Industries. None of it mattered now. In that narrow space between luxury and desperation, between life and something far worse, time was already running out. In the back of the plane, in seat 32B, 18-year-old Lena Parker sat bolt upright. She'd been half asleep, headphones still playing quiet instrumental music from her study playlist, the kind of soft piano that helped her focus when she was memorizing anatomy terms or chemical compounds. Her worn gray hoodie was pulled up over her braids, and her backpack sat wedged between her feet, stuffed with flashcards and a dog-eared biology textbook she'd bought second-hand 3 years ago for $4.50 at a garage sale in East Oakland. But those words over the intercom snapped her into full alert. Severe abdominal pain. Medical emergency. No doctor responding. Her mind raced, cycling through everything she'd learned, everything she'd read, everything she'd witnessed. Sudden onset, tearing pain from abdomen to chest. Cold sweat, rapid pulse, pale skin. She'd seen this before. The memory hit her like a physical blow. 2 years ago. A Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Thanksgiving. Her uncle Jerome, the man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had fixed her first car, who had told her she was smart enough to be anything she wanted to be, he'd collapsed on the kitchen floor of their apartment in West Oakland. One moment he was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of greens. The next moment he was on the ground, clutching his stomach, his face twisted in agony. Lena had been the only one home. She'd called 911 immediately, but the ambulance took 43 minutes to arrive. 43 minutes while she watched her uncle suffer. 43 minutes while she held his hand and told him help was coming. By the time they got him to the county hospital, it was too late. The doctors had explained it afterward, in that gentle clinical way that medical professionals use when delivering the worst news. Ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. The main artery from the heart had weakened over time, ballooning outward until it finally burst. When that happened, the internal bleeding was catastrophic. The window for survival was measured in hours, sometimes less. They said if someone had recognized the signs sooner, if someone had gotten him to surgery faster, maybe, that word had haunted Lena ever since. It visited her at night, when she couldn't sleep. It followed her to school, where she threw herself into biology and chemistry with an intensity that startled her teachers. It sat beside her at the nursing home where she'd gotten a job, caring for elderly patients, learning from the nurses and CNAs who actually knew what they were doing. Maybe, she'd made it her mission to learn everything she could about medical emergencies. Not just aneurysms, but heart attacks, strokes, diabetic crises, allergic reactions. She'd read textbooks borrowed from the library, watched surgical videos online, quizzed the doctors and nurses at the nursing home until they started calling her Little MD. She'd done all of this because she never wanted to feel that helpless again. Never wanted to stand over someone she loved, not knowing what was wrong, not knowing how to help. And now, somewhere at the front of this plane, someone was experiencing exactly what Uncle Jerome had experienced. She was almost certain of it. Lena looked around. Nobody else was moving. No one was standing up. Maybe a doctor was asleep, or afraid to speak up, or just didn't want to get involved. Or maybe there simply wasn't one. A flight attendant walked past her row, moving quickly toward the front of the plane, her face tight with worry. "Excuse me," Lena said, standing up. "I think I might know what's wrong." The woman barely glanced at her. She saw what everyone saw. A skinny black girl in a faded hoodie, jeans slightly too short, because she'd grown 2 inches since her mother bought them, cheap sneakers with a hole near the toe where the sole was starting to separate. "We need a licensed medical professional. Please stay seated," the attendant said automatically, and kept moving. Lena's heart pounded. She knew what she looked like. She knew what people assumed when they saw her. A poor kid from the wrong side of town, someone to be overlooked, someone whose opinion didn't matter. But she also knew what a ruptured aneurysm looked like. And she knew that if she was right, that woman up front had maybe 3 hours to live, maybe less. "Ma'am," she called louder, stepping into the aisle. Her voice carried further than she intended, and several heads turned in her direction. "Please, listen to me." Sudden tearing pain, from abdomen to chest, rapid pulse, dropping blood pressure, cold sweat. That's not a heart attack. That could be a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. If I'm right, she needs emergency vascular surgery. We're talking hours, not days, 3 hours at most, maybe less. The attendant stopped, turned, stared. Something in Lena's voice had made her pause, not the words themselves, but the certainty behind them. The steadiness, This wasn't a teenager seeking attention or trying to cause drama. This was something else entirely. "How would you know that?" the attendant asked, her tone somewhere between skepticism and desperate hope. "Because my uncle died from the same thing 2 years ago. I was there, I watched it happen because no one recognized what was wrong until it was too late." Lena's voice didn't waver, though inside she was trembling. "I'm not a doctor, I know that. But I've studied this, I've read everything I could find about it. I know what I'm looking at, and if that woman doesn't get to a hospital with a vascular surgeon in the next 3 hours, she won't make it." The attendant hesitated, caught between protocol and the raw conviction in this young woman's eyes. Then another voice crackled over the intercom from the cockpit. "Cabin crew to first class, now, situation critical." That was enough. The woman nodded tightly. "Come with me." "But if you're wrong." "I pray I'm not," Lena answered. As she followed the attendant past the sleeping rows, heads turned, eyes followed, some curious, some confused, a few looked skeptical, even annoyed. What was she doing? Who was she to walk toward first class like that? An older man in a golf shirt muttered something under his breath. Lena caught the words kid and ridiculous. A woman in pearls across the aisle shook her head with obvious disapproval, her lips pressed into a thin line of judgment. Another passenger, a businessman with silver hair and an expensive watch, actually laughed. "They're letting teenagers play doctor now," he said to his seatmate, not bothering to lower his voice. But Lena didn't look back, she didn't respond. She didn't let their words penetrate the focus that had settled over her like armor. She remembered what her mother always said, even on the hardest days, even when the bills piled up and the rent was late and the world seemed designed to keep them down. Knowledge means nothing if you're too scared to use it, and dignity isn't something they can give you or take away, you carry it yourself. When they reached row 4, Margaret Hale was gasping. Her skin had gone gray, the color of ash, her lips were tinged with blue. Richard was pale himself, holding her hand, completely helpless. The first-class cabin, with its wide leather seats and champagne glasses and heated blankets, suddenly looked exactly like what it was, a very expensive place to be terrified. "Who is this?" Richard asked sharply, when Lena approached. His eyes swept over her, registering the hoodie, the braids, the cheap shoes. "Where's the doctor?" Sandra spoke up quietly, her voice carefully neutral. "There's no doctor on board, sir. This young woman says she may know what's happening." Richard's eyes narrowed, something hardened in his face. Lena had seen that look before. She'd seen it from teachers who didn't think she belonged in advanced classes, from store owners who followed her around like she might steal something, from security guards who asked if she was lost when she walked through nice neighborhoods. "This is my mother," Richard said, his voice cracking between fear and anger. "Her life is on the line. I don't want guesses, I don't want experiments. I want a professional. A real professional." The words stung, but Lena didn't let them show on her face. She met his gaze calmly. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't apologize for existing. "Sir, I understand how you feel. I do, but I've seen this before." Her symptoms match a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. Sudden tearing pain that radiates from the abdomen up to the chest, cold sweat, rapid pulse, blood pressure dropping, skin going gray. If I'm right, she's bleeding internally right now. The main artery from her heart has burst, and she needs surgery within 3 hours, or she won't survive. Richard stared at her. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. Margaret's head turned slightly toward Lena, her eyes glassy with pain but still aware. "Still fighting. It feels," she whispered, each word a tremendous effort, "like something tearing me apart from the inside. Like fire, spreading up." Lena nodded, feeling a chill run down her spine. "That's exactly what patients describe. Sir, I know you don't know me. I know I don't look like someone you'd trust with your mother's life. But right now, I'm what you've got. There's no doctor coming. There's no one else, it's just me. And I'm telling you, if we don't act fast, she's not going to make it." The cabin noise seemed to fade into the background. The hum of the engines, the whispered conversations, the announcements, all of it disappeared. All Richard could see was his mother's pale face, her lips losing color, her chest rising in panicked, uneven gasps. Her eyes found his, not wild, not frantic, just pleading, silently begging for help, trusting him to do whatever it took. He wanted a doctor, he wanted certainty, he wanted someone with a white coat and a medical degree and decades of experience. But none of that was coming. He looked at Lena again, really looked at her this time. Past the hoodie and the braids and the cheap shoes, the girl didn't waver. There was no arrogance in her eyes, no bravado, no teenage overconfidence, just urgency, just purpose, just someone who had seen death once and refused to see it again. Richard's grip on his mother's hand tightened, then loosened. The seconds stretched out like hours. Finally his shoulders dropped. The resistance crumbled. "What do you need?" he whispered, his voice thick with fear and surrender. "Tell me what to do." In that moment, the lines between first class and economy disappeared. There were no designer suits or worn hoodies, no corner offices or minimum wage jobs, no assumptions about who mattered and who didn't. Just an old woman fighting to stay alive, and a teenage girl doing everything she could to help her. And in that narrow aisle, at 35,000 feet above the dark Atlantic, something began to shift, though none of them realized just how much. The scene inside first class was tense, nearly frozen in a kind of terrified stillness. Margaret Hale lay reclined, eyes fluttering, her breathing shallow and fast. A thin layer of sweat coated her forehead, her neck soaking through her clothing. Her hands clutched at the armrests, like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid, something real. Richard knelt beside her, his face drawn and colorless. He looked like a man watching his whole world crack apart. All his power, all his influence, all the doors his name could open. None of it could help his mother now. Lena moved quickly but calmly. She'd learned from watching the nurses at the care home that panic was contagious. If she stayed steady, others would follow. If she fell apart, everyone would. "We need to keep her completely still," Lena said, her voice firm but gentle. "No sudden movements, no trying to sit up or shift positions. If this is what I think it is, any strain could make the internal bleeding worse." Sandra handed over the medical kit. Lena opened it, scanning the contents quickly. Basic supplies, bandages, antiseptic, a blood pressure cuff, some basic medications. Nothing that could fix what was happening inside Margaret's body, but maybe enough to buy time. "Is there any aspirin in here?" Richard asked, remembering something he'd read once about heart attacks. "I thought aspirin was supposed to help with." Lena shook her head firmly. "No, absolutely not. If this is a ruptured aneurysm, aspirin would make it much worse. It thins the blood, makes it harder to clot. We need the opposite. We need her blood pressure stable, and her body as calm as possible. We need to slow everything down, not speed it up." She found the blood pressure cuff, and carefully wrapped it around Margaret's arm. The numbers that appeared made her stomach tighten, but she kept her face neutral. Low, very low. The internal bleeding was already taking its toll. She looked at Margaret, speaking directly to her now, her voice soft and steady. "Ma'am, I need you to try to breathe slowly. I know it hurts. I know you're scared. That's okay. Being scared is normal, but slow, steady breaths. Can you do that for me? In through your nose, out through your mouth. Nice and easy." Margaret's eyes focused on Lena's face. Something about the girl's calm presence, her steady hands, her unwavering gaze, seemed to reach through the fog of pain and terror. She nodded weakly. "Good. That's good. You're doing great. Just keep breathing like that. Nice and slow." Lena turned to Sandra. "Can you get me blankets? As many as you can find. We need to keep her warm, and I need someone to tell the captain that we need to land. Now, right now. The closest airport with a trauma center and vascular surgeons. Not the closest airport, period. The closest one that can actually help her." Sandra was already moving. "I'll notify the cockpit immediately." Richard watched all of this with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. This girl, this teenager from the back of the plane, she was taking control of a situation that had left him completely paralyzed. He was a man who ran meetings with world leaders, who made decisions that affected thousands of employees, who had been praised his whole adult life for his leadership and decisiveness, and now he was utterly useless, while an 18-year-old in a worn-out hoodie gave orders like she'd been doing it all her life. How do you know all this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena didn't look up. She was adjusting the blankets around Margaret, checking her pulse, monitoring her breathing, doing everything she could to keep the woman stable. Because my uncle had the same thing, she said quietly. 2 years ago, he collapsed in our kitchen. By the time the ambulance came, by the time anyone figured out what was wrong, it was too late. She paused, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face. Pain, old pain, never quite healed. I was 17. I watched him die, because no one knew what to do. No one recognized what was happening. After that, I made sure I would. Richard had no response to that. Around them the cabin had gone silent. Passengers in nearby seats watched with wide eyes, their expensive meals forgotten, their champagne glasses untouched. Some whispered to each other. One man, the same one who had muttered earlier about kids playing doctor, now sat perfectly still, his skepticism replaced by something that looked almost like shame. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a medical emergency on board, we are diverting to Reykjavik, Iceland. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 45 minutes. Medical personnel will be standing by upon arrival. 45 minutes. Lena did the math in her head. 45 minutes to land, then taxiing to the gate, then getting Margaret off the plane and into an ambulance, then the drive to the hospital, then prep for surgery. 2 hours, minimum, maybe more. She'd said Margaret had 3 hours, maybe less. It would be close, very, very close. She looked down at Margaret, who was watching her with something like wonder. Despite the pain, despite the fear, there was a kind of amazement in the old woman's eyes. You're going to be okay, Lena said, and she made herself believe it, made herself project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Help is coming. You just have to hold on a little longer. Can you do that for me? Can you hold on? Margaret's hand reached out, trembling, and found Lena's. Who are you? She whispered. My name's Lena, Lena Parker, and I'm going to stay right here with you until we land. I'm not going anywhere. Margaret squeezed her hand with what little strength she had left. Thank you, she whispered. Whatever happens, thank you. Lena squeezed back. Don't thank me yet. We've still got work to do. And as the plane banked toward Iceland, as the night sky rushed past the windows and the engines hummed their steady song, Lena Parker held a stranger's hand and refused to let go. The plane touched down at Keflavik International Airport, just as the first hints of gray light appeared on the horizon. The landing was smooth, professional, the pilot clearly pushing for speed without sacrificing safety. Before the wheels had even stopped turning, Lena could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles clustered on the tarmac. Paramedics were already waiting, their vehicle lights cutting through the Arctic darkness like beacons of hope. The aircraft doors opened before the usual protocols, flight attendants stepping aside as the medical team rushed aboard. Within minutes, Margaret Hale was carefully transferred onto a stretcher. The paramedics worked with quick, efficient movements, connecting monitors, starting an IV line, communicating in rapid Icelandic. Richard was at his mother's side immediately, still clutching her hand as they began wheeling her toward the door. His face was pale, his expensive suit rumpled, his whole demeanor that of a man who had aged 10 years in a single night. Lena stepped back, pressing herself against the cabin wall to give them room. She had done what she could, now it was in other hands, professional hands, trained hands. But as they wheeled Margaret down the narrow aisle toward the jet bridge, the older woman turned her head, searching the faces around her until her eyes found Lena. The girl, Margaret said weakly to the paramedics, her voice thin but insistent. She comes too. She saved my life. She comes. One of the paramedics looked at Richard questioningly. Richard looked back at Lena. She was standing alone near row 3, small and tired and utterly unremarkable, a teenager in a faded hoodie, a girl from the back of the plane, someone who by all the rules of the world he lived in, shouldn't have been able to do what she just did. Please, he said, his voice rough with emotion, come with us. Lena hesitated. This wasn't her family, this wasn't her place. She didn't belong in this world of first-class travel and emergency diversions and private medical care, but Margaret's eyes were still on her. pleading, grateful, human. She grabbed her backpack and followed them off the plane. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical equipment, and urgent voices speaking in rapid Icelandic. Lena sat in the corner, trying to stay out of the way, watching the paramedics work. A doctor had joined them at the airport, a calm woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes who examined Margaret while firing questions at Richard. When did the pain start exactly? Where did she feel it first? Has she had any previous cardiovascular issues? Is she on any medications? Any allergies we should know about? Richard answered what he could, stumbling over some questions, drawing blanks on others. He realized, with a stab of shame, how little he actually knew about his mother's health. How long had it been since he'd asked her how she was feeling? Really asked, and really listened. But it was Lena who filled in the crucial medical observations. Sudden onset of severe tearing pain, originating in the abdomen and radiating upward to the chest, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Cold sweat, rapid pulse, blood pressure dropping steadily throughout the flight. Skin color went from pale to gray. She described the pain as something tearing her apart from inside. I suspected ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm from the symptom pattern. We kept her as still as possible, tried to keep her calm, monitored her breathing, kept her warm to prevent shock. The doctor looked at Lena with new eyes. You're a medical student. No ma'am, I was supposed to start pre-med eventually. I just know what this looks like because I saw it before, in my family. The doctor held Lena's gaze for a long moment. Well, your instincts were correct. We'll know more after imaging, but the presentation is textbook AAA rupture, and your emergency care on the plane was exactly right. She turned to her colleague and spoke in Icelandic. Lena caught the word surgery, and hurry. The ambulance seemed to speed up. Through the small back windows, Lena watched the Icelandic landscape rush by. Dark volcanic rock, patches of snow, a sky that couldn't decide if it was night or day. She was further from home than she'd ever been in her life, and she'd never felt more alone. At Landspítali University Hospital, everything moved with controlled urgency. Margaret was rushed through the emergency department, past trauma bays and anxious families and the universal sounds of a hospital fighting to keep people alive. Richard ran alongside the stretcher until a nurse stopped him at a set of double doors. Sir, you can't go beyond this point. We need to take her to imaging immediately, and then likely straight to surgery. There's a waiting room just down the hall. Someone will update you as soon as we know more. Richard looked through the small windows of the doors, watching his mother disappear around a corner. His hand reached out toward her, then dropped to his side. Please, he said to the nurse. Please save her. We'll do everything we can. The doors swung shut, and Richard stood there, alone, in a hospital hallway 6,000 miles from home. Lena found a seat in the waiting room, a small space with uncomfortable plastic chairs and outdated magazines in languages she couldn't read. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A television in the corner played Icelandic news on mute. She pulled her phone from her backpack and stared at the screen. 4 missed calls from her mother, 6 text messages, increasingly worried. Baby, where are you? Your flight landed hours ago. Call me. Lena, I'm starting to worry. Please let me know you're okay. I called the airline. They said your flight diverted to Iceland. What's happening? Call me. And 1 email notification from the Howard University Office of Admissions. The subject line read, regarding your scholarship interview. Lena stared at that email for a long moment. Her thumb hovered over it, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. Not yet. She already knew what it would say. Instead she called her mother. Lena Marie Parker, where in God's name are you? Mom, I'm okay. I'm in Iceland. Iceland? Baby, what are you doing in Iceland? Your interview was this morning. What happened? Lena closed her eyes. There was a medical emergency on the plane. Mom, a woman was dying. No doctors on board. I helped her. We had to divert. I couldn't just. The line was silent for a moment. Then her mother's voice came back, softer now. You saved someone's life. I don't know if she's going to make it yet. She's in surgery now. But I did what I could. I did what Uncle Jerome. She couldn't finish the sentence. Oh baby, her mother's voice cracked. I'm proud of you. You hear me? Whatever happens with that scholarship, I'm so proud of you. I know, Mom. I know. I need to see this through. I need to know she's okay. You stay there as long as you need to. I'll figure out the rest. I love you, Lena. I love you too, Mom. She hung up the phone and sat back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her like a wave. Somewhere in this hospital, surgeons were fighting to save Margaret Hale's life. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., an interview panel had moved on without her. Somewhere in Oakland, her mother was probably crying. And Lena sat alone in an Icelandic waiting room watching the minutes tick by, wondering if any of it would mean anything at all. Richard found her there an hour later. He'd changed into a plain sweatshirt the hospital had given him, his suit ruined beyond saving. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard. He looked like a man who had just stared into the abyss and wasn't sure yet what he'd seen. He sat down in the chair next to Lena without asking permission. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. They confirmed it. Ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. Exactly what you said. They're operating now. Could be several more hours. Lena nodded slowly. How did she seem when they took her back? Scared. But fighting. Richard paused. She asked about you. Wanted to know if you were still here. I'm not going anywhere until I know she's okay. Richard looked at her then. Really looked at her. Not the way he'd looked at her on the plane with suspicion and condescension. This was different. This was the look of a man seeing something he'd never expected to find. Why? He asked quietly. Why what? Why did you do it? You didn't know her. You didn't know me. We're strangers. He gestured vaguely, struggling to find words. We're not from the same world. You had no obligation. No reason to get involved. Why did you? Lena was quiet for a moment, considering the question. When my uncle died, she said finally, I kept thinking about all the what-ifs. What if someone had recognized what was happening sooner? What if the ambulance had come faster? What if anyone, anywhere along the way had known what to do? She looked down at her hands. I couldn't stop those what-ifs from haunting me. So I decided I would learn. I would know, so that if I ever found myself in that situation again, I wouldn't be helpless. I would be able to do something. She looked back up at Richard. Your mother was in trouble. I knew what was wrong. I couldn't walk away from that. I couldn't pretend I didn't know. That's not who I am. Richard absorbed this in silence. Even though it cost you something, he said. It wasn't a question. Lena's jaw tightened slightly. What do you mean? On the plane, while they were loading my mother into the ambulance, I heard you on the phone. Something about an interview. A scholarship. Lena didn't answer right away. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone, finally opening the email she'd been avoiding. Dear Miss Parker, she read aloud, her voice flat. We regret to inform you that your absence from today's scheduled interview has resulted in the automatic withdrawal of your application for the Thompson Medical Scholarship. Per the program guidelines, no alternative arrangements or reschedules can be accommodated. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she closed the email and put the phone away. Full scholarship to Howard University. Pre-med track. The interview was this morning. In person only. One shot. They don't do makeups for any reason. She shrugged, a small tired motion. It is what it is. Richard felt something cold settle in his chest. You knew when you decided to help that you would miss it. I figured there was a chance, but you did it anyway. She needed help. The rest of it wasn't going to matter if she died. Richard leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had built his entire career on calculating costs and benefits, risks and rewards, investments and returns. Every decision optimized, every choice strategic. And here was this girl, this teenager, who had thrown away her future without a second thought, because a stranger needed help. That scholarship, he said slowly. What did it mean to you? Lena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. It meant everything. My mom works 2 jobs, sometimes 3. We don't have savings. We don't have family money. College is a dream for people like us. Not a guarantee. That scholarship was my one real shot at medical school. At becoming a doctor. She paused. At making sure what happened to my uncle doesn't happen to anyone else. And now I'll figure something else out. Work for a few years, save up, Try again. Maybe community college first. There are other paths. Longer ones, harder ones, but they exist. She forced a small smile. My mom always says that doors don't close without windows opening, even if you have to climb through them. Richard shook his head slowly. That's not right. It is what it is. No, his voice was harder now, something fierce entering it. That's not acceptable. You saved my mother's life. You gave up your future for a stranger. That should mean something. It has to mean something. Lena looked at him steadily. Mr. Hale, I appreciate that. I really do, but I didn't do this for a reward. I didn't help your mother because I expected something in return. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and I would do it again tomorrow, knowing exactly what it would cost me. But your dreams, your career, everything you've worked for, will figure themselves out, or they won't. She met his gaze without flinching. I've been broke my whole life, Mr. Hale. I know how to keep going when things don't work out. It's kind of our specialty. Richard stared at her, and something shifted behind his eyes. Something fundamental, something that had been calcified for decades, cracking open for the first time. He'd spent his whole adult life accumulating money, power, status, all the things society told him mattered. And here was this girl who had nothing, who had just lost her best chance at having something, and she wasn't bitter, wasn't angry, wasn't even particularly sad. She was just at peace with her choice, because she knew it was the right one. When was the last time Richard had made a decision simply because it was right, regardless of what it cost him? He couldn't remember. 4 hours later, a surgeon emerged from behind the double doors. Richard shot to his feet. Lena stood more slowly, her heart pounding despite herself. The surgeon was a tall man, with kind eyes and an exhausted face. He pulled off his surgical cap and ran a hand through his damp hair. Mr. Hale. Yes, my mother. How is she? The surgeon smiled, a real smile, a good smile. She's stable. We were able to repair the rupture and stop the internal bleeding. It was close, very close. Another hour, maybe less, and we would have lost her. But she's strong. She fought, and she's going to make it. Richard made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. His knees seemed to give out, and he grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. She's okay. She's really okay. She'll need to stay here for at least a week, probably more. Recovery will take time. But yes, she's going to be okay. Richard covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. Lena stood there, watching, feeling something warm and fierce bloom in her chest. She'd done it. They'd done it. Margaret was going to live. The surgeon turned to her. You're the young woman from the plane, the one who identified the rupture. Lena nodded, suddenly feeling very small and very young. You saved her life, the surgeon said simply. I want you to understand that. The window for this type of injury is incredibly narrow. If you hadn't recognized what was happening, if the plane hadn't diverted when it did, if she'd arrived even an hour later, he shook his head. Your actions on that plane made the difference between life and death. Don't ever doubt that. Lena didn't know what to say. Her eyes were stinging, and she blinked rapidly, refusing to cry. I just did what anyone would do, she managed. The surgeon smiled sadly. No, you did what very few people can do. You stayed calm in a crisis, you trusted your knowledge, and you acted when no one else would. That's not common. That's exceptional. He patted her on the shoulder and turned back to Richard. Your mother is asking to see you, and she specifically asked to see. He glanced at Lena, the girl with the braids who held her hand. I believe she called you her guardian angel. Margaret Hale looked small in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines, and the quiet beeping of machines keeping track of her vital signs. But her color was better. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes, when they opened, were clear. Richard took her hand gently, tears still streaming down his face. Mom, I'm here. You're going to be okay. Margaret smiled weakly. Takes more than a little internal bleeding to get rid of me. You should know that by now. Richard laughed through his tears. Don't joke. You scared me half to death. Just half. I must be losing my touch. Her eyes moved past Richard, searching the room until they found Lena standing uncertainly in the doorway. There she is. My angel. Come here, child. Let me look at you. Lena approached slowly, feeling out of place among all the medical equipment and the expensive private room and the obvious wealth that surrounded these people. But Margaret's smile was warm and genuine, and it pulled her forward. "How are you feeling, ma'am?" "Like I got hit by a truck that was also on fire." Margaret's voice was thin but had a spark of humor in it. "They told me what you did, all of it. How you figured out what was wrong when no one else could. How you kept me alive until we landed. How you stayed even after." She paused, and something flickered in her eyes, something knowing. "Richard told me about your scholarship, about what you sacrificed." Lena shook her head. "It wasn't a sacrifice. You needed help. There was no choice to make." "There's always a choice, child. Most people would have chosen differently. Would have stayed in their seat and told themselves it wasn't their problem. Would have convinced themselves that someone else would handle it." Margaret's hand reached out, trembling, and found Lena's. "You chose to stand up. You chose to fight for a stranger. That choice cost you something precious. Don't minimize that." Lena's throat tightened. She found she couldn't speak. Margaret squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "You're going to be a doctor someday. I can see it in you. The way you stayed calm, the way you took charge, the compassion in your eyes. You were born for this, and I'm going to make sure you get there. Whatever it takes." Lena finally found her voice. "Mrs. Hale, I appreciate that, but I didn't do this for." "I know, that's exactly why it matters." Margaret's eyes were bright now, fierce with a strength that seemed impossible for someone who had just survived emergency surgery. "The world is full of people who do good things for credit, for recognition, for advantage. You did a good thing because it was right. That's the rarest thing there is, and it should be rewarded." She looked at her son. "Richard, we're going to help this young woman. Not as payment, not as charity, as justice, as the recognition that good people deserve good things to happen to them." Richard nodded slowly. "I was thinking the same thing." But Lena was already shaking her head. "Please, if you want to do something, don't just do it for me." Both Richard and Margaret looked at her with surprise. Lena took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "There's 100 kids in my neighborhood just as smart as me, just as determined, just as capable of becoming doctors and lawyers and teachers and engineers, but most of them will never get a chance, not because they're not good enough, but because the deck is stacked against them from the start." She met Richard's eyes. "You want to thank me? Come see where I'm from. See what people like me and my mom deal with every day. See the clinic that has one doctor for 12,000 patients. See the pharmacy that can't stock half the medications people need. See the bus stop where folks wait for an hour in the rain because there's no shelter and no reliable transit." Her voice was steady but passionate. "Then if you still want to help, don't help me. Help all of them. Build something that lasts. Something that changes the system, not just one person's life." The room was silent. Richard and Margaret exchanged a look. Something passed between them. Something unspoken but profound. Finally Richard spoke. "Okay, show me." 1 week later, Margaret was stable enough to be transferred to a rehabilitation facility. Richard arranged for the best care money could buy, but before he flew back to the States, he made a promise to Lena. "As soon as I can, I'm coming to Oakland, and I want you to show me everything." Lena wasn't sure she believed him. Rich people made promises all the time, grand gestures after emotional moments, but the follow-through was rare. She flew home on a ticket. Richard had upgraded to first class, which felt strange and wrong, and she couldn't quite get comfortable in the big leather seat. She spent the whole flight thinking about what would come next. Her mother met her at the airport with a hug that lasted 5 full minutes. "My baby, my brave, stupid, wonderful baby. I'm okay, Mom, really. I know you are. I raised you to be okay." Her mother pulled back, eyes wet but proud. "Now come on. I made your favorite dinner, and you're going to tell me everything." 3 weeks later, a black town car pulled up in front of the narrow apartment building in West Oakland, where Lena had lived her whole life. The paint on the walls had faded to an indeterminate gray. A paper sign taped to the entrance read, "Elevator out of order." Again, the courtyard was cracked, weeds pushing through the concrete, and someone had left an abandoned shopping cart near the mailboxes. Richard Hale stepped out of the car. He was alone. No assistant, no security team, no entourage. He looked up at the building, at the neighborhood around it, at the liquor store on the corner, and the check-cashing place next door, and the chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Then he took a deep breath, and walked toward the entrance, where Lena was already waiting. "You actually came," she said. "I said I would. People say a lot of things. I'm not people, and after what you did for my mother, I figured the least I could do was show up when I said I would." Lena nodded slowly. "Okay then, let me show you around." They walked for 3 hours. Lena showed him the bus stop with no shelter, where her mother had waited countless times in the rain, and the heat and the cold. She showed him the clinic that was supposed to serve the entire neighborhood, but barely had the resources to keep its doors open. She showed him the corner store, that was the only place within a mile to buy fresh food, and most of what they sold wasn't fresh at all. She showed him the school she'd attended, with its outdated textbooks and overwhelmed teachers and broken windows that never seemed to get fixed. She showed him the nursing home where she'd worked, caring for elderly patients who had spent their whole lives in this neighborhood, and now couldn't afford the medications that might let them live a little longer. She showed him the street corner where her uncle had collapsed, where an ambulance had taken 43 minutes to arrive, because this neighborhood was low on the priority list for emergency services. Richard didn't say much, he just looked, and listened, and tried to understand. At one point, an elderly woman waved at Lena from her front porch. "Lena, girl, I heard what you did on that airplane. The whole neighborhood's talking about it. We're proud of you, baby." Lena waved back and smiled, but Richard saw the sadness behind it. "She's got diabetes," Lena said quietly as they walked on. "Type 2, been trying to get an appointment with an endocrinologist for 8 months. The waiting list at the public hospital is that long. By the time she gets seen, she might have lost her feet." Richard felt something twist in his gut. "That's not right." "No, it's not, but it's normal, for us." They ended up at Lena's apartment, where her mother Denise Parker was waiting. Denise was a small woman with eyes that had seen too much and hands that had worked too hard. She wore a wrist brace on her right hand from the carpal tunnel she'd developed after years of factory work, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was tired but whose spirit refused to quit. "So you're the airplane man," she said, looking Richard up and down with an appraiser's eye. "My daughter tells me you're some kind of rich businessman." "I'm yes ma'am, I run a company." Denise nodded slowly. And now you've come to see how the other half lives." "Mom," Lena said quietly. "No, it's okay," Richard said. "She's right to be skeptical. People like me, we don't usually show up in neighborhoods like this, and when we do, it's usually for a photo opportunity or a tax write-off. So why are you here?" Richard thought about the question. Really thought about it. "Because your daughter saved my mother's life. And when I tried to thank her, she told me not to. She told me to come here instead, to see what she sees every day, to understand what she's fighting against." He paused. "And because I think she's right, I've spent my whole career building things, companies, portfolios, wealth, but I've never built anything that actually mattered, never built anything that changed anyone's life for the better." He looked around the small apartment, the photographs on the walls, the couch with the crocheted blanket, the kitchen table covered with Lena's textbooks and study materials. "I want to do something real," he said. "I don't know exactly what yet, but I want to learn, and I figured the best way to learn was to come here and listen." Denise studied him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. Then unexpectedly she smiled. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. I'll make coffee, and then we'll talk." They talked for hours. Denise told him about her life, about working 2 and sometimes 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, about the impossible choices she faced every month: pay the electric bill or buy Lena's school supplies, get the car fixed or afford groceries, take a sick day or risk losing her job. She told him about the neighborhood, how it had changed over the decades she'd lived there, how the factories had closed and the jobs had left and the drugs had moved in, how the schools had deteriorated and the crime had risen and the hope had slowly, steadily drained away. But she also told him about the good things, the community organizations trying to make a difference, the churches running food pantries and after-school programs, the neighbors who looked out for each other, who shared what little they had, who refused to give up. "We don't need saviors, Mr. Hale," she said finally. We don't need rich people swooping in to rescue us. We need partners. We need people who will invest in our community, not just throw money at it, who will listen to what we actually need, not decide for themselves what's best for us, who will help us build something that belongs to us, that we can sustain on our own. Richard nodded slowly. What would that look like, specifically? Denise looked at Lena, who had been quiet for most of the conversation. Tell him, Denise said. Tell him what you've been dreaming about. Lena hesitated. Then she spoke. A community health center. A real one. Not a bandage on a bullet wound, but something comprehensive. Doctors and nurses from the neighborhood, or at least people who actually care about it. Specialists who rotate in. A transportation program so people can actually get to their appointments. Mental health services. Substance abuse treatment. Chronic disease management. She leaned forward. And most importantly, community involvement at every level. A board made up of people who live here. Decisions made by the people who understand what we're dealing with. Not charity. Partnership. Richard was quiet for a moment, processing. That's a big vision. You asked what would make a difference. I did. He nodded slowly, and I think you're right, about all of it. He looked at Denise, then back at Lena. I want to make this happen. Not put my name on it, not turn it into a PR opportunity, but really genuinely make it happen. With the community leading the way, Denise raised an eyebrow. You're serious? I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Why? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. Richard thought about the question, about his mother in that hospital bed, about Lena in that airplane aisle, about all the choices he'd made in his life and where they'd led him. My mother told me something once, he said slowly. A long time ago, before I became this. He gestured vaguely at himself. She said I was living a life where I'd forgotten why I started. She was right. I forgot what actually mattered. Your daughter reminded me. He stood up. I'm not going to make promises today. I'm going to go home, talk to people who know more than I do about how to do this right, and come back with a real plan. But I want you to know this is happening, one way or another. Denise stood up too. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand. Okay, Mr. Hale, let's see what you're made of. 6 months later, Richard stood in a community center in East Oakland, surrounded by neighborhood residents, local healthcare workers, city officials, and members of his own foundation's team. Behind him on a large screen were the plans for the Oakland Community Health Initiative, a comprehensive neighborhood health center with full medical services, mental health care, substance abuse treatment, and chronic disease management, a transportation program providing free rides to appointments, a community garden and nutrition education center, a training program to help local residents become healthcare workers. And at the center of the organizational chart, in a position of real power, Lena Parker, Youth Advisory Chair. This center won't have my name on it, Richard said to the assembled crowd. It won't be the Hale Health Center or the Hale Medical Clinic. It belongs to this community. Every decision will be made by people who live here, who understand what you need, who will be accountable to you. He paused. 6 months ago I was on an airplane when my mother's life was saved by a young woman from this neighborhood. A young woman who gave up her own dreams to help a stranger. When I tried to thank her, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Don't help me, help all of them." He looked at Lena, who was standing near the back of the room, trying as always to fade into the background. Lena Parker could have asked for anything, a scholarship, a job, money. Instead she asked me to come here, to see what she sees, to understand what she's fighting for. He turned back to the crowd. I came. I saw, I listened, and now I understand. This community doesn't need charity, it needs investment, it needs partnership, it needs people with resources to step up and support what you're already building. The applause that followed was warm but cautious. These were people who had heard promises before, who had been let down before, who knew that rich people's commitments often evaporated when the cameras went away. But this time would be different. Richard had made sure of it. The endowment was in place. The partnerships were secured. The community oversight board had real power, and he wasn't going anywhere. After the announcement, Lena found Richard standing outside the community center looking up at the building that would soon be transformed. You actually did it, she said. We did it. You started this. I just provided the resources. Lena shook her head. That's not true. You could have written a check and walked away. You didn't. Richard turned to look at her. No, I didn't, and I'm not going to. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. There's something else. I wasn't sure whether to tell you this today or wait, but you should know. Lena took the envelope warily. What is this? Open it. She did. Inside was a letter on expensive stationery from an organization called the Helix Global Initiative. She read it once, then again, then looked up at Richard with wide eyes. I don't understand. Remember the doctor on the plane, the one who didn't speak up? Lena nodded slowly. His name is Dr. Amari. He just had surgery on his hands and couldn't perform any medical procedures. That's why he didn't come forward. But he watched everything you did, every decision you made, every word you said, and afterward he wrote a report to his organization. Richard smiled. The Helix Global Initiative is one of the most prestigious medical scholarship programs in the world. They have a specific interest in finding young people who demonstrate exceptional character under pressure. Dr. Amari nominated you. Lena's hands were shaking as she read the letter again. They want to offer me a full scholarship to medical school. Any medical school you want, all expenses paid, plus a guaranteed residency placement when you graduate. Lena's legs seemed to give out. She sat down heavily on the steps of the community center, the letter clutched in her hands. This can't be real. Richard sat down beside her. It's real, and it's not charity. It's recognition. Dr. Amari's exact words were, "We don't look for the most accomplished candidate on paper. We look for the person who doesn't walk away when no one's watching." Tears were streaming down Lena's face now. She didn't try to hide them. I didn't expect. I know. That's exactly why you deserved it. They sat in silence for a moment watching the sun set over Oakland, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Then Lena asked the question that had been forming in her mind since she'd started reading the letter. What about the clinic? The program we just announced. I was supposed to be on the advisory board. I can't just abandon that. Richard shook his head. You're not abandoning anything. We'll make it work. You'll go to medical school and you'll come back. This community will still be here. The clinic will still be here. And when you're Dr. Lena Parker, you'll be able to do even more good than you can now. Lena looked out at the neighborhood she'd grown up in. The same cracked sidewalks, the same faded buildings, but something was different now. Something had shifted. My Uncle Jerome, she said softly. He used to say that one person can't change the world, but they can change one block. And if enough people change one block each, eventually the whole world changes. Richard nodded. Smart man. He was. Lena smiled through her tears. I think he'd be proud of this, of all of it. I think he would too. 6 years later, on a warm May morning in Baltimore, Dr. Lena Parker stood backstage at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine graduation ceremony, adjusting the collar of her gown with trembling fingers. Through a gap in the curtain she could see the auditorium filling up. Thousands of seats, families streaming in with flowers and cameras, the hum of excited conversation rising toward the vaulted ceiling. She spotted her mother in the third row wearing a deep purple dress that Lena had secretly bought for her 3 months ago and hidden in the back of her own closet until this morning. Denise Parker sat straight-backed and proud, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue even though the ceremony hadn't started yet. Next to her mother sat Margaret Hale, now 80 years old, her white hair pinned elegantly beneath a small hat. She walked with a cane these days, and her doctors had advised against long trips. She'd ignored them completely. I watched that girl save my life at 35,000 feet, Margaret had told Richard when he'd expressed concern about the journey. You think I'm going to miss watching her become a doctor? I'll rest when I'm dead. Richard sat on Margaret's other side, looking almost unrecognizable from the man Lena had met on that airplane 6 years ago. The sharp edges had softened. The permanent tension in his shoulders had eased. He laughed more now, visited Oakland every few months, knew the names of the clinic staff, the patients, the kids in the after-school program. He'd become against all odds something like family. Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her mother. I see you peeking through that curtain, girl. Stop fidgeting. You earned this. She smiled and tucked the phone away. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance, speeches from administrators, recognition of distinguished faculty. The long, slow procession of graduates crossing the stage to receive their diplomas. When they called her name, Lena walked across that stage on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The diploma was heavier than she'd expected. Or maybe that was just the weight of everything it represented. 6 years of studying until her eyes burned. Countless nights in the library when everyone else was asleep. Clinical rotations that tested every ounce of strength she had. Moments of doubt so deep she'd almost quit. Almost convinced herself that a girl from East Oakland had no business being here. But she kept going. Because every time she wanted to give up, she remembered Uncle Jerome. Remembered Margaret gasping for air at 35,000 feet. Remembered all the people in her neighborhood who needed doctors who actually understood where they came from. After the ceremony, her mother found her in the crowd and pulled her into a hug so tight Lena could barely breathe. "My baby," Denise whispered. "My baby is a doctor. Your Uncle Jerome is looking down right now and he is so proud." "I know he is. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." "Yes, you could have. You would have found a way. You always do." Denise pulled back, cupping Lena's face in her hands. "But I'm glad I got to be here for the ride." Margaret approached next, moving slowly with her cane but with eyes as sharp as ever. "Dr. Parker," she said, testing out the words, "has a nice ring to it." Lena bent down to hug her gently. "Thank you for coming. You didn't have to make this trip." "Nonsense. I made a promise to myself in that hospital in Iceland. I said if I survived, I was going to watch you walk across that stage." A hail doesn't break her promises. Richard hung back, letting the women have their moment. But when Lena finally turned to him, he was smiling that soft, genuine smile she'd come to know over the years. So he said, "What now, Dr. Parker?" Lena didn't hesitate. "I'm going home. The clinic needs another doctor. And those kids in the training program need someone to show them what's possible." Richard nodded slowly. "You know, when we started that clinic, I thought I was helping your community. Turns out, your community helped me a lot more." "That's usually how it works," Lena said. "When you stop trying to save people and start trying to work alongside them, everyone ends up better off." They walked out of the auditorium together, the four of them, into the bright afternoon sunshine. Families posed for photographs on the lawn. Graduates threw their caps in the air. Somewhere, a string quartet was playing something classical and celebratory. Denise linked her arm through Lena's. "I made reservations at a nice restaurant for dinner. My treat." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Mom, you don't have to. I've been saving up for 2 years for this dinner. Don't you dare argue with me." Richard and Margaret exchanged an amused glance. Some things never changed. As they walked toward the parking lot, Lena took one last look back at the auditorium. At the stage where she'd received her diploma. At the institution that had trained her to be a physician. But she knew the real education had happened long before she'd ever set foot in a classroom here. It had happened in a cramped apartment in Oakland, watching her mother work double shifts to keep the lights on. In a nursing home, learning from CNAs who knew more about patient care than most textbooks. On an airplane over the Atlantic, holding a stranger's hand and refusing to let go. She'd learned that medicine wasn't really about medicine at all. It was about showing up when no one expected you to. About seeing people when everyone else looked away. About understanding that healing happened in communities, not just in hospitals. 3 weeks later, Dr. Lena Parker walked through the doors of the Oakland Community Health Initiative for her first official day as a staff physician. The clinic had grown since she'd last been here. 2 new wings, a pharmacy, a mental health center, a training facility where young people from the neighborhood learned to become medical assistants and nurses and eventually doctors themselves. And at the entrance, a small bronze plaque that Lena had seen 100 times but that hit differently today. 6 simple words, "No one is saved alone." She touched the plaque lightly as she walked past, heading toward the examination rooms where her first patients were already waiting. Outside, the Oakland sun was rising over the same cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences she'd known her whole life. But something was different now. Something had changed. And it had all started with a choice on an airplane, 6 years ago, when a girl in a hoodie decided that a stranger's life was worth more than her own dreams. If you want more emotional, heartwarming stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, where stories of kindness, healing, and second chances come to life through powerful narration. Follow for more touching stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story that might just change someone's day. Thank you for reading. See you in the next story.